بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي اللهم فقهنا في الدين وعلمنا التأويل وافتح لنا فتوح العارفين اللهم لك الحمد وإليك المشتكى وأنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. Inshallah, we're going to continue on from where we left off last week. Just to briefly make a mention of a few points that are really important. I just want to mention a quick recap, inshallah. Last week we spoke a little bit about, we mentioned a little bit about the history of usul al-fiqh and how it became something which was, how it became a science which was something which was considered mu'tamad, or something which was considered to be important Islamically, especially in the sciences. We spoke about the relationship between usul al-fiqh and fiqh itself. We mentioned that this was a science that existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ himself. We mentioned that there was tatawur, or there was an evolution taking place within the science that happened during the time also of the companions after the Prophet ﷺ passed away. We also mentioned that when the generation of the tabi'een, when they came, okay, they also increased and they also contributed a lot to the science as well. And we mentioned then the time or the generation of the Imam, and we mentioned that that was the time in which the science became considered to be a science in of in itself, separate from fiqh, okay, in which separate books would have been authored, okay, and it would have been taught separately from fiqh itself. Previously it was all taught as one science. It was all considered to be one science. And you can do qiyas, and you can make the same, you can say the same suggestion could also be made for many of the other sciences in the Islamic religion also. What's the difference between ilm al-hadith and mustalah? All of these are different. I mean, once the knowledge became, when the scholars started to teach and they started to author, that's when the knowledge started to break down. And then it became different sciences taught depending on how a person wanted to study, okay? And we spoke a little bit about the different strands and the different madhahib within usul al-fiqh, because not all of the approaches are the same, depending on the way in which the ahkam are derived and what constitutes dalil, or what constitutes evidences, and knowledge of definitions. All of these things it's very important for a person to understand then that there are different ways in which these could be derived. Those differences of understanding evolved and became different legal theories, became different schools, and that's how it happened. We mentioned a little bit last week about the first tariqah, which was the tariqah known as the tariqah Shafi'iyya, or the Shafi'i tradition in usul al-fiqh. And we mentioned that that tradition was also known as tariqatul mutakallimin, because they were considered to be, many of them used or utilized dalilul aql, or rational thought, in order to understand what's the relationship between how to derive and how to use an evidence, or how to utilize the evidence in order to bring about a ruling, okay? And what's the relationship also between, so the mabahith became much more than just usul al-fiqh itself. It became also about ta'rifat. How do you define something? Because in order for us to understand a ruling or how a ruling is legislated, we need to be able to define words. Words are very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking to us in the Arabic language. That's a language. That's linguistics. So in order for us to be able to understand what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, we need to be able to define different words, okay, and the relationship those words also have with other words. And that's very interesting, because the first section that the author is going to get in this book is going to be a definition of certain words. He's going to first define to you what does usul mean, and then he's going to define to you what does fiqh mean. And then he's going to say, when you put those two words together and you make a composition of these two words, what does that definition mean? So words are very important in usul al-fiqh. Because words are what our Quran is comprised of. Our whole religion and everything is comprised of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you. And if we don't know how to define these words, then we won't be able to understand how to define anything else beyond that point. If you don't know what the word means, then everything that comes after will only be nothing but what? A waste of time. First and foremost, the ta'rifat, that was the most important mabahith in ilm al-mantiq, which is also related to ilm al-fiqh. And also, not just ta'rifat, also the nature of evidence. What does evidence actually mean? Okay? And what is considered to be fallacious evidence and valid evidence? Because there are certain types of evidences that is used that are valid, considered to be absolutely legitimate to utilize. And there are certain types of evidences that are not considered to be valid and considered to be fallacious. So for example, today if I were to ask you anything and you were to tell me, you were to give me an answer. Say for example, we're speaking about the weather and you said to me, tomorrow is going to be raining. And I say to you, well, how do you know tomorrow is going to be raining? And you say, well, the evidence, and I ask you for evidence and proof. How do you know? If you say to me something like, well, I mean, on the 25th of December last year it was raining. So tomorrow is the 25th, it should rain as well, because the 25th of December. That's what you would call a fallacious utilizing of evidence. That's a fallacious dalil. That dalil is invalid, even though that's what it is. But if you were to say to me something more hasasi, for example, you would say to me, it was something which was considered, everybody, all of the geologists and everybody else agreed tomorrow most likely, because of the way and the shift in the clouds and everything else, it's going to be raining tomorrow. That's considered to be a valid usage of evidence, and that's considered to be legitimate. Both are evidences. One is considered to be valid and the other isn't. So which one is? So this is exactly the mabahith that's going to be studied here in usul. And who has the right? Who are the ones who have the right to make that call? Okay, who has the right to say yes? This is considered to be a hukum shar'i, and the evidence is this ayah in Quran. What is the relationship between that verse in the Quran and the hukum that he derived? Because who's doing the derivation? Who's the one making the call? It's a scholar, a human being, right? So does he have to also have certain attributes that he has to have? Does he have to have certain types of knowledge? Does he have to be an expert, or does she have to be an expert in the Arabic language? Does she have to know does he or she have to know a certain amount of ayat in Quran? Do they have to know a certain amount of prophetic tradition? Do they have to have some qawa'id and some principles in which they're able to derive or they're able to use when they're making this call or this istidlal? This is all mabahith in usul al-fiqh. All of this is related to the science we know as usul al-fiqh. We mentioned to you some of the books that were written in the past of the first tradition, the Shafi'i tradition. We mentioned the book called al-Mu'tamad that was written by Ibn Hussein Muhammad ibn Ali al-Basri al-Shafi'i, who died in the year 463. We also mentioned the book called al-Burhan, written by Imam Al-Haramain, the same author who wrote this small treatise. He, alayhi rahmatullah, passed away in the year 487. Also, we spoke about the great book Al-Mustasfa min ilm al-usul, or fi ilm al-usul, written by Imam Abu Hamid Hujjatul Islam, Imam Al-Ghazali alayhi rahmatullahi wa radiyallahu anhu, who died in the year 505. And these were considered to be the main books in the science, especially of that tradition. And then you have Tariqatul Ahnaf, also known as Tariqatul Fuqaha, or the pathway of the Fuqaha or the jurists. They have their own method in usul al-fiqh. And their method is very interesting because what they do, and it's very important because they were the ones who introduced this method, and this method became a science in of its own, and other sciences were born out of this science. So it's a very interesting thing. The Ahnaf, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with their efforts. What they did was they introduced a system known as the tariqah of the fuqaha. And this methodology was one in which they had the ahkam already there. So the usul al-fiqh came after the fiqh. So when the ahkam were there, they derived from the rulings, okay, the relationship that they have with each other. So they introduced a pattern of qawa'id, okay, and they derive from there the relationship that the hukum and the ruling has with the asl. So the asl was born out of the furu' instead of the other way around. So the tariqatu Shafi'i is completely different, in which you have a manhaj, you have the usul, and the fiqh comes out and is derived from those usul. Whereas the Ahnaf is the other way around, you could say, you could argue, in which they have the furu' and the usul is derived from the furu'. So you have the ahkam in fiqh already there. And then you look at the pattern on the relationship between the ahkam, and then you derive certain usul, okay, foundations and principles from the branches. That is known as tariqatul ahnaf. And this specific science, or this tradition, this Hanafi tradition, and it's something which is called the Hanafi tradition because they were the ones who introduced it. But later on, many of the scholars adopted it themselves. This led also to the introduction of new sciences in Islam. For example, qawa'id al-fiqhiyya. It came from this principle. So you had qawa'id al-fiqhiyya, which is another science that is taught, but it was born out of what and evolved from what? The tradition of the Ahnaf in this regard. And also, you had many scholars that have written, okay, books that tended to conform with this tradition. For example, you had the book called Risalatu fil Usul, written by Abil Hasan Ubaidillah ibn Hussein al-Kirakhi, alayhi rahmatullah. He died in the year 340. You also have another book called Al-Fusul fil Usul, written by Abi Bakr Ahmad ibn Ali al-Razi, also known as Al-Jassas, who died in the year 370. You also have the great book in Hanafi Usul, written by Fakhrul Islam al-Bazdawi, who died in the year 483. And this method especially was very important, considering the fact that most of the books written by, for Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, for example, and Ibn al-Qayyim, whenever they speak about any usul in their books, it's usually following this pattern rather than the first pattern. So most of the books that they have written, so وَإِنَّ كِتَابَاتِ ابْنِ تَيْمِيَّةَ وَابْنِ الْقَيِّمِ فِي الْأُصُولِ فِيهَا تَوْجِيهٌ وَاضِحٌ لِلْمَذْهَبِ الْحَنْبَلِ مِنْ نَاحِيَةِ طَرِيقَةِ الْأَحْنَافِ. So the books mainly written by Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn al-Qayyim in this regard, or in usul al-fiqh, follows the pattern, the tradition of who? Which tariqah? Tariqatul Ahnaf. Absolutely, tariqatul fuqaha. And then you have something that happened later on after the 600s. A new tradition was born in usul al-fiqh itself, in which there was a combination of both. Okay? A combination of both methodologies combining into one. Okay? And the example of that would be a book written by one of the scholars, alayhi rahmatullah, Ahmad ibn Ali Muzaffar al-Din al-Sa'ati al-Hanafi. What he did was he combined the book Al-Ihkam by Al-Amidi, Sayfuddin Al-Amidi, and he combined the book of alayhi rahmatullah Al-Bazdawi, and he turned it into one book. So he put them both together and it became one book. Also you have At-Tanqih, written by Ibn Mas'ud al-Mahbubi al-Bukhari al-Hanafi, who died in the year 747. And you have also Tajuddin al-Subki, who wrote the book Jam'ul Jawami', which is one of the greatest books written in usul al-fiqh that's studied today. And that book is a combination of both of those traditions. And Jalaluddin al-Mahalli, who was the one who wrote the commentary on this book that we're going to be going over inshallah, he also has a commentary on that book as well, Jam'ul Jawami', called Badr al-Tali' fi halli Jam' al-Jawami'. So he actually has a commentary on both books. He has a commentary on this book, and he also has a much more in-depth commentary on the book written by Tajuddin al-Subki. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with both of them. So that's in just contextualizing for you, inshallah, or just briefly summarizing for you these different traditions, because what I want to do is I want to quickly get into the book, inshallah. I don't want to wait around too long. So I'm just going to mention a little bit, inshallah, about the author of the book. I'm going to mention a little bit about Imam Al-Haramain, and then inshallah I'm going to mention a little bit about Imam Jalaluddin Al-Mahalli, and then we're going to go straight into the book, inshallah. So Imam al-Haramain, his name is Shaykh al-Imam al-Muhaqqiq al-Faqih al-Usuli. And these are, whenever the scholars give titles to these shuyukh, it denotes something really important. It's not to praise the person, but it's to indicate to those who are reading how many of the sciences that they've mastered whilst they were alive. So he was an imam, that was number one. He was al-muhaqqiq. Al-muhaqqiq is somebody who is a tahqiq, meaning tahqiq al-masail. Whenever they're, in those days, especially more so than today, today you find many books, whenever they're being printed out, the tahqiq has been done by so and so. But the tahqiq in those days, okay, when you're correcting something, or you're authenticating something, or when you're looking into that which is authentic as opposed to that which isn't authentic, it was a much more difficult process. The books weren't printed in those days. You couldn't just go to the library and just get a book and that was it. People had to go and journey to find manuscripts. So they would go and they would journey for a long time to find a manuscript written by that, handwritten by possibly the scholar who authored the book. And then they would, from that, they would be able to determine whether or not that sheikh actually said that. So people would have to travel days and months in order to make any verification of anything. And he, alayhi rahmatullah, was one of those. If you read his book, Nihayatul Matlab, fi Dirayat al-Madhab, it's probably about 20 volumes in fiqh. Alayhi rahmatullah, the way in which he went and he authenticated certain masail pertaining to the Shafi'i madhab gives you an idea as to how much of a great mind he was, alayhi rahmatullah. So he was someone who was a muhaqqiq. He was al-faqih, and this is something which is known. All you need to look into is the books that he's authored. So he's authored a book called Nihayatul Matlab. And most of the Shafi'i books that came after all go back or are all a summarized version of that book. So for example, Nihayatul Matlab, fi Dirayat al-Madhab, what was born out of that book? Imam al-Ghazali, who was the student of Imam al-Haramain, came and he summarized that book and he turned it into al-Basit. And then he summarized his own book and turned it into al-Wasit. He summarized it again and he turned it into al-Wajiz. Al-Wajiz, another Imam came along, Imam Abu al-Qasim al-Rafi'i alayhi rahmatullah, and what he did was he summarized that book further, called it al-Muharrar, and Imam al-Nawawi came afterwards and he summarized al-Muharrar and he turned it into Minhaj. So the Minhaj that we have today, where did it originate? It originated with the book written by this scholar here, Imam al-Haramain, called Nihayatul Matlab. So he was also an usuli. He authored books in usul al-fiqh. The one that we're going to be looking over is one of those books, but one which is much more comprehensive, much more profound, okay, and considered to be one of the best books written on the subject in usul al-fiqh, considered to be a mu'tamid, a book which is people are dependent on, is his book called al-Burhan. Okay, his book called al-Burhan. He was also al-Mufassir. He used to be a teacher of Quranic tafsir. When he was in Mecca and Medina, he used to teach tafsir al-Quran also. He was also al-Mantiqi, he was a logician also, and he was also al-Mutakallim. He was also a scholar in Islamic theology. Abu al-Ma'ali, Imam al-Haramain, Abdul Malik, Ibn Abdullah, Ibn Yusuf, al-Juwayni, al-Naysaburi alayhi rahmatullah. He was born in the year 419. He came from a righteous family. His father was also a faqih. The first teacher that he had was his father. And you'd come to understand that many of these great scholars, you'd also, whenever you're studying their history or looking into their background, you'll come to realize that most of them come from a righteous family. And most of them, their first madrasa was their home. So their first madrasa was their home. That's where they first learned. And he memorized the Quran at a young age. وَكَانَ أَبُوهُ وَوَالِدُهُ إِمَامًا فِي التَّفْسِيرِ. His father was an imam in tafsir and fiqh wal-adab wal-lugha. So he was an expert in ethics. How many of us study Islamic ethics nowadays? There's something that many of us are lacking because it's not a science that's studied anymore. The past it used to be studied. There was a whole subject just on Islamic ethics. How should we behave as Muslims? Not just with each other, but also with society, also with the government, also with every other institute in the countries that we live in. How should we behave? These are things which are very important. Many a times something we don't even take into consideration nowadays. These are things which were studied. You'd have students who were studying these as sciences. Okay? And that's how the Islamic moral ethical code became that something which was the most considered to be the most supreme in most of the world. And this is something which is accepted. He also studied with his uncle Ali ibn Yusuf al-Juwayni, who was known as Shaykh al-Hijaz. وَكَانَ فَقِيهًا, and he was also a faqih also. So from a young age you can begin to understand. He studied fiqh with his father, he studied lugha with his father, he studied mantiq with his father, he studied usul al-fiqh also with his father. And then later on, there was a political problem that happened in the country or in the land that he was living in, which meant that he had to leave. So he went to Baghdad for a while, and then he went to Hijaz. So he was living in Hijaz for 4 years, and that's where he gets the name Imam Al Haramain. So the name Imam Al Haramain, or that laqab, comes from the fact that he, alayhi rahmatullah, lived there for 4 years. So he was a teacher in both of the Haramain. He was a teacher in Masjid Al Haram, he was also a teacher in Masjid Al Nabawi. He used to be there and he used to teach fiqh, and he was someone who also used to give fatwa. كان يدرس ويفتي ويجمع طرق المذهب, and he became a prominent scholar of the Shafi'i madhab, especially when he was there. إلى أن رجع إلى بلده بنيسابور, until he went and he returned back to the country in which he came from, النيسابور. فأقعد للتدريس بنظامية نيسابور. Then he became a professor in the Institute of al-Nizamiyya. What is al-Nizamiyya? Al-Nizamiyya was an Islamic university that existed that had 2 main branches, one in Naysabur and one in Baghdad. And it was considered to be one of the most privileged Islamic institutes the world has ever seen. Obviously, it doesn't exist anymore now. Some of the professors that were teaching in that institute was Imam Al Haramain himself, this Imam here. Also, you had Imams like Imam Al Ghazali, who was a teacher over there. You had Imam Abu Ishaq al-Shirazi, the great scholar of usul and fiqh. He has a book written called al-Muhadhab, in which Imam al-Nawawi he commented on, and it became al-Majmu' Sharh al-Muhadhab. Also, you had many other scholars also from the different traditions that were teaching there. You also had many students who graduated from that school. Al-Hafidh ibn Asakir, Ibn al-Jawzi, many other of the great scholars that you always hear of and you read their books, they were graduates from this institute. They used to go there as students and they used to learn. And this was considered to be one of the most privileged institutes, and one of the main reasons why that was, and one of the main reasons why it was built by the great scholar, plus he was a politician. His name was Nizam al-Mulk. Nizam al-Mulk, alayhi rahmatullah, he built this institute and he funded it, and he bought both of those branches as a rival to Jami'atul Azhar, as a rival to what? The University of Al-Azhar in Egypt. But then a question arises, why would he need to build a rival institute? Was there any problem with Al-Azhar at that time? Was there any issue? Does anybody know anything that might have been an issue at that time? Or nobody here reads any history? Yes, in the back. Very good. Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you, thank you. At that time, Al-Azhar, by the way, wasn't built in the beginning, it wasn't built as an institute to study the Sunni creed or Sunni sciences. Al-Azhar began as an institute to learn the Ismaili doctrine in Shia Islam. Because those who control it and those who introduced it was the Fatimid Empire. So Dawlatul Fatimiyya, also known as Dawlatul Ubaidiyya, they were the ones who built Al-Azhar. They were the ones who introduced Al-Azhar. Okay? So that was an institute which began, in its inception, it began as a place to teach what? The Ismaili doctrine. Only after Salahuddin al-Ayyubi conquered Egypt did he transform Al-Azhar from a place in which they teach Shi'i Ismaili tradition to the tradition of Sunni Islam. So only Salahuddin al-Ayyubi was the one who introduced Sunni Islam into the institute, and from that point on, it became a place where Sunni creed was taught. Before that, it was considered to be what? Ismaili. So many of the other prominent leaders in the Islamic world, they would try and build places and institutes which would rival Jami'at al-Azhar at that time. And this was one of the places that was built for that purpose. Because at that time they were considered to be a really, really powerful state. And what they would do is they would send out many of their du'at and everything else. So they needed a place in which they could also do the same. Okay? And one of these places which was built was An-Nizamiyya. Which was why, if you read the history of Imam Al-Ghazali, one of the reasons why he has so many books in which he authored speaking explicitly about the Batiniyya, meaning the Fatimid doctrine and the Ismaili doctrine, was because of the fact that many of those people who introduced An-Nizamiyya asked him to do so. Okay, it was considered to be a really problematic thing at the time, considering the fact that many of those people were being assassinated. There was an entire group called the Assassins, and what they would do is they would assassinate anybody who would be against the Ismaili creed. They're known as the Hashashiyun, and they almost killed Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. They killed many. Nizam al-Mulk, the one who built the institute, was assassinated. By who? By the assassins. So they existed for many, many centuries until the only time in which they were taken or they were dismantled as a group that existed or almost as an empire was when the Mongols came. So when the Mongols came, they took out most of their forts, and then that's how they perished. But the reason why this institute was built was in order to teach the Islamic creed and the Sunni sciences. So he became a professor, alayhi rahmatullah, in this institute. And then he had many students. They say that he had over 300 students, and only 3 rose to great prominence. Before I go there, inshallah, who were some of his teachers? One of his teachers was the great Al-Hafidh Abu Nu'aym al-Asfahani. Anybody who knows Abu Nu'aym al-Asfahani knows his great book Hilyatul Awliya. He was one of the greatest muhaddithin in his time. Also, his father, Muhammad ibn Abdullah ibn Yusuf al-Juwayni, the great faqih, and many others also. One of his other teachers was the great muhaddith Imam al-Bayhaqi. That was also one of the teachers of Imam al-Haramain. And he also had many students. The best student that he had by his own admission was who? Hujjatul Islam, Imam Al-Ghazali alayhi rahmatullah. Also he had another student, Abu al-Hasan Ali ibn Muhammad ibn Ali al-Tabari. Also had another student, Abu Ahmad ibn Muhammad ibn Mudaffar al-Naysaburi. He would also say many a times, كان الجويني يقول, he would always say, التحقيق للخوافي. So he was talking about his students. He would say, anybody who wants to know anything about tahqiq, the best of my students who are best at verifying, okay, is al-khawafi. Wal-jaryan, and the one who is the best at articulation, okay, is al-Ghazali. Wal-bayanu, and clarification is lil-kiya. Al-Kiya, he was the one who was the best when it comes to bayan. And he would always say, Al-Ghazaliyu bahrun mughriq. Imam Al-Ghazali, he's a sea in which people would drown in, meaning in his knowledge, alayhi rahmatullah. That's how much he would consider his student, Imam Al-Ghazali, to have surpassed him. One day, Imam Al-Ghazali wrote a book called al-Mankhul in usul al-fiqh. And then he said to him, his teacher, Imam Al-Juwayni, said to him, Dafantani wa ana hayyun. You buried me while I'm still alive. You should have at least waited a little bit till I die. Yani wait till I die first, and then, you know. So it was quite interesting. As-Sam'ani mentioned, and he said, كان إمام الأئمة على الإطلاق. He was one of the greatest imams. Al-Mujma', everyone agreed. على إمامته شرقا وغربا, east and west. لم ترى العيون مثله. The eyes have not seen the likes of Imam al-Haramain. And people would say so many different things about him, alayhi rahmatullah. I don't want to delve into it too much, inshallah. The one who wrote the commentary on the book, his name is, everybody knows who Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. Does anybody have a copy of Tafsir al-Jalalain at home? Anybody know Tafsir al-Jalalain? The Tafsir book, nobody knows Tafsir al-Jalalain? Tafsir al-Jalalain, one of the authors who wrote half of the Tafsir al-Jalalain, was Jalaluddin al-Mahalli. And then when he passed away, his student continued and finished it off with Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. That's why it was called the Tafsir of the two Jalals. Both of them were the ones who authored this book. Jalaluddin al-Mahalli was the one who wrote the commentary on this book, and his student after he passed away, Jalaluddin al-Suyuti. He has a great book also in many sciences. Jalaluddin, his name was Shaykh al-Imam al-Faqih. He was a faqih. He wrote a commentary on a minhaj called Kanzul Raghibin. He was also an usuli. He has a commentary on this book that we're going over, and he also has a commentary on another book also, like I told you, Jam'ul Jawami, and he has commentary on also many other books. His name was Abu Abdullah Jalaluddin Muhammad ibn Ahmed ibn Muhammad al-Mahali al-Misri. He was from Egypt, and he was born in the town of Al-Qahira, and he was born in the year 791. I don't know if I mentioned the year that I don't know if I mentioned to you the year that Imam Al-Haramain passed away. He passed away in the year 478. As for Imam Al Mahalla, he was born in the year 791, and he had also many students, and he studied with also many teachers. One of his teachers was Al-Hafiz Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, the great muhaddith scholar who wrote Fath al-Bari, the commentary on Sahih al-Bukhari. Also Sirajuddin ibn al-Mulaqin, Sirajuddin al-Bulqini or al-Bulqini, you can say both, Izzuddin ibn Jama'a. These are all of his teachers. He also had many students. One of his greatest students, as you already know and I already told you, was Jalaluddin as-Suyuti. Jalaluddin as-Suyuti was one of the students of Imam al-Mahalli. And he died in the year 864, alayhi rahmatullahi wa radiyallahu anil jami'. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with all of them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them for their works and for their contributions and for everything else. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us. وَنَفَعَنَ اللَّهُ بِعُلُومِهِمْ فِي الدَّارَيْنِ آمين. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala enable us to benefit from their knowledge in dunya and in akhirah. The author, he starts the book and he says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is a tradition and something which was introduced by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself in his book. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and it's an ayah of Quran. إِنَّهُ مِن سُلَيْمَانَ وَإِنَّهُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. Indeed, it's from Sulaiman, and indeed it says in the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. However way you want to translate it, because a translation will never truly be 100% correct. You just go with whatever that's written, because you can't really get a full translation. So many people say it's the meaning that counts, and a person needs to actually learn the Arabic language in order to be able to appreciate what it truly means. However, this is something which also the Prophet ﷺ, he would also do, because whenever he would write any letters to any of the emissaries or any of the different politicians of different countries or heads of state, he would also write Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So it became a tradition. Prophet ﷺ, he said, كل أمر ذي بال لا يبدأ فيه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فهو أقطع فهو أجدب. In another variation of the hadith, anything that doesn't begin with the name of Bismillah, then it's cut off from blessings. If you want blessings in your life, always begin something that you like with Allah's name, so that you may derive some of the blessings, inshallah. When you eat, when you drink, okay, when you do your wudu, as I will come inshallah also, and everything else. Then he says, the author, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Alhamdulillah is al-thana'u bil jamil, is to praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with that which is most beautiful. Okay? Ala jihati ta'zeem, with an intention to glorify Him. We say Alhamdulillah because we glorifying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we say Alhamdulillah ala kulli hal because whether or not we praise Allah, Allah is praised anyway. So we need to understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the fadl that He has over us as the one who created us, is that wherever state that we may be in, whether we're in a state of existence or we're non-existent, okay, whether it's before or after, whatever the case may be, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always praised. And that's why this is something which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala began the Quran with. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. وَالصَّلَاةُ عَلَى سَيِّدِ الْمُرْسَلِينَ. And blessings be upon the leader of all of the messengers, Muhammadin. So Muhammadin in the Arab sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, in the Arabic language, this would be called Muhammadin here, would be considered to be atf ma'tuf, or it would be considered to be badal, because in relation to that which came before it, you have to give it the same grammatical ruling. So you have to say ala sayyidil mursalin Muhammadin. Muhammadin, so it's connected to the statement that is made before. Wa ala alihi, and also upon his al. Who is the al of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? What does that mean? His family. Okay. Anybody else? Imam Shafi'i, when he spoke about the Al, he said they are Banu Hashim and Banu al-Muttalib. So he says this is considered to be the Al of Muhammad. Banu Hashim wa Banu Muttalib. There was a hadith in which it was mentioned and it was said, Inna Banu Hashimin, or Inna Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib shay'un wahid. Banu Hashim and Banu Muttalib are one entity. And there's many reasons as to why that may be the case, even though if you look at it, when you look at it in terms of genealogy, they're on this. Banu al-Muttalib in relation to Banu Hashim is the same as Bani Abdul Manaf, for example, or Bani Abd Shams, for example, or Bani Nawfal, all on the same level. But then why does Banu al-Muttalib get why does it get extra privilege? And because the Prophet said they're one entity in reality. If you look into the history and you read the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, when the Muslims were being boycotted in Mecca, Banu al-Muttalib was added to the boycott of Banu Hashim. And the Prophet ﷺ, he never forgot the fact that they also struggled as a community along with Banu Hashim. And Imam Shafi'i, by the way, he is al-Muttalibi, meaning that he's from Banu al-Muttalib. But there's also another opinion saying that Alu Muhammadin kullu mu'minin at-taqi. And this was the opinion of Imam al-Nawawi. He said, Alu Muhammad is actually every pious believer. There's a hadith also, Alu Muhammadin kullu mu'minin at-taqi. Every believing pious person who has taqwa of Allah is from Alu Muhammad. Then he said the author, wa sahbihi. And also these blessings upon not just the Al of Muhammad but also upon his companions. Who are the companions and what constitutes companionship in Islam? How do you know if somebody is a companion or not? Who is a companion as opposed to who isn't? What defines a companion? This is important because in order for us to understand, we need to define the words. That's why usul al-fiqh is so important. What is a sahabi? Anybody? Sorry? Those who believed in his message? They saw him and believed in him. Jazakumullah khair. You were going to say something as well. The same thing. Okay, you gave me a definition of sahabi according to the muhaddithin. The science that we're studying right now, which is usul al-fiqh, they have their own definition for what a sahabi is. So add another criteria to what was just mentioned, which is they have to have accompanied the Prophet ﷺ for a period of time in which they could appropriate that name. Can I call you a friend or a companion if I never walked with you for a little bit at least, or I didn't introduce myself and we became friends and we got along? Does that make sense? Some people look confused. What does a companion mean? If I call you my companion, does that not mean that me and you should have some kind of affiliation? If I just see you from far away and that's it, and then I like that, does that mean I'm your companion? There has to be some kind of acquaintance, right? That's according to the usuliyin. Everything that you mentioned plus what? The fact that there has to be some kind of acquaintance and companionship. Okay, so their definition is a little bit more deeper than the definition generally given by Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani. Mentioned something very interesting in his book Nuzhatun Nadar, in his own commentary on his own book Nukhbatul Fikr, in which he says, can everybody in the world who believed in the Prophet ﷺ be considered to be a companion, even those outside of Mecca and outside of Medina? During his time. Because as in even though they never saw the Prophet ﷺ, they believed in the message, but they never saw the Prophet ﷺ ever. Because Ibn Hajar, he says, in the night of al-Mi'raj, the Prophet ﷺ was shown the entire world. So if he was shown the entire world and he saw them, then shouldn't that constitute companionship? That's a mas'ala, inshallah. I'll throw you away. You can think about it yourself. وَصَحْبِهِ وَسَلَّمْ. And also peace upon him as well. وَبَعْدُ. And then he says, and after that, فَهَذِهِ وَرَقَاتٌ. This is a small, what's the time? هَذِهِ وَرَقَاتٌ فَهَذِهِ وَرَقَاتٌ قَلِيلَةٌ. These are small pages. Okay, very small pages. تَشْتَمِلُ. That's very inclusive. عَلَى مَعْرِفَةِ. to acquaint oneself with, or to understand, or to comprehend, or to have knowledge of, fusul, certain chapters, from usul al-fiqh, from the subject or the science known as usul al-fiqh. ينتفع بها المبتدئ وغيره, that which will be a source of benefit for the one who is beginning to study the science and the one who's already acquainted with the science. So this will be a source of benefit for a person who's already knows the science quite well and they want to revise. And it's also a source of benefit for anybody who is being introduced, or it's the first time they're ever learning, okay, this subject. So this is the book considered nowadays especially to be one in which any beginner student of knowledge who wants to be introduced into this science, it's probably one of the first books that they would learn. Okay, especially the matan alone. But we included both the matan and the commentary, okay, by al-Mahali. And then he mentions and he says, and this is very important here inshallah, because now you're going to be introduced into the importance of ta'rif, defining. Because he says here, وَذَلِكَ, meaning usul al-fiqh, ay lafdhu usul al-fiqh. So he's going to be speaking about these two words, usul and al-fiqh. He says these two words is a composition, okay? Mu'allaf means something which has been constructed, okay, brought together. Min juz'ayni mufradain, from two separate words which have its own meaning independently. So these are two words, they have their own independent meaning. If you say the word usul, it means one thing. If you say the word al-fiqh, it means one thing also. But when you attach them together and you make it a composition, a whole new definition is born. A whole new definition is born, okay, when you bring them together. So that's what he's mentioning here. So that's why it's very important, because many a times Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does Allah use words which are composite in the Quran? Of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does many times. So then if that's the case, will that not have an impact on our understanding of the Quran? Absolutely. So that's why it's very important for us to understand. He's introducing us to something which is very important straight from the onset, how to define words, okay? And what definition does it have when it's singular, or when it's separate, when it's not composite, and what definition does it have when you bring and you introduce another word along with it also? What happens then? So the author says, it's mu'allafun min juz'ayni mufradain. It's two words which have its own separate meanings. Okay? أحدهما, the first one is usulun, wal-akharu al-fiqh. The first is usul, and the second one is al-fiqh. Usul means something, and fiqh also means something completely different. But when you put them together, he's going to mention what it means also. Imam Al Mahalla, he says, من الإفراد المقابل للتركيب للتثنية والجمع. The reason why he mentions this here is usul, is that a jam'? Is that mufrad? The word usul, mufrad by the way means singular. It's not a singular, but the Imam Al Haramain mentioned that it's a singular. But if the usul is actually a plural of what? Asl. But what he means here is that it's a composite, meaning usul is a mufrad in terms of what can be attached to it, not in relation to plural and singular. So it has nothing to do with plural and singular, but it's called, or he called it mufrad in relation to the fact that it can be attached to another word, okay, and there can be the birth of a new meaning or a new definition. That's what he means. So that's why he says over here, min al-ifrad. What he means here when he says mufrad is that it is muqabil li-tarkib. It accepts composition. Okay, you can add something onto it. Not the relationship, it's not the mufrad that you might understand it to mean, which is related to that which is singular, that which is plural. It has nothing to do with that. Meaning usul and al-fiqh, you can put it together, right? And it will have a new definition. So that's what he means over here. And then he says, وَالْمُؤَلَّفُ يُعْرَفُ بِمَعْرِفَةِ مَا أُلِّفَ مِنْهُ. In order for you to understand any composition or any words which have been brought together, or a word which has been constructed by more than one word, you have to understand them separately and independently. Otherwise, you will never be able to understand what it means when it's put together, when it has a new meaning, if you don't understand it separately. So you're going to have to understand what asl means. What does usul mean? What does asl mean? And what does fiqh mean? Once you understand those two words, then you'll be able to understand any new definition that comes afterwards that's born from these words when it's put together, when it's constructed. So the author, he says, وَالْمُؤَلَّفُ, anything which has been constructed, or is a composition, يُعْرَفُ, can only be understood بِمَعْرِفَةِ, by understanding مَا أُلِّفَ مِنْهُ, that which it was constructed from. So it was constructed here, in this example, it was constructed from two different words. So in order for us to understand usul al-fiqh, we need to understand usul, we need to understand al-fiqh. The author then he says, فَالْأَصْلُ, that which is al-asl. So that's the singular of al-usul. الَّذِي, it is, هُوَ مُفْرَدُ الْجُزْءِ الْأَوَّلِ مَا يُبْنَى عَلَيْهِ غَيْرُهُ. An asl in the Arabic language is anything that constitutes a foundation and everything else is built on it. When the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, بُنِيَ الْإِسْلَامُ عَلَى خَمْسٍ, that Islam is built upon 5. That means Islam is the asl, right? And then everything else, when what he is going to mention, is from the furu'. So, shahadati an la ilaha illallah wa anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh is a branch of Islam. You can't have Islam without it. Also, as-salah is a branch that comes out of Islam. Similarly, az-zakah. Similarly, as-sawm, fasting. Similarly, al-hajj. These are branches. What is the asl? Bunya al-Islam. Everything is built upon Islam, all of these things. And then he mentions what they are. So what happens if the asl is destroyed? If the asl is destroyed, does that mean anything afterwards will come? Do you tell a non-Muslim to pray salah? Why don't you? For what reason? Sorry? What's missing? No, I know what's missing. The shahada is missing, but what's missing? The asl. The asl. Jazakallah khair. The asl is missing. It's not even there. So if that's the case, if the asl isn't there, then are you going to be... Can a tree grow without roots in the ground? So that's exactly what it is. So if you don't have roots in the ground, then nothing will grow. So you can't have branches without there being a base. So the base form is the most important thing. Even in the Arabic language, the base form of a word is what you derive all of the other. When you want to learn the Arabic language, you learn the base word. From that base word, how many words could you construct? You construct past tense, you construct the present tense, and you construct the future tense. All from what? The base word. Okay? Whether it's thulathi or it's ruba'i or whatever the case may be, the construction always takes place from the root. That's why it's always important to understand and to learn something from the beginning, the foundation. From the foundation, that's how people learn knowledge. One of the greatest scholars of the past, he would say, we learn all of this knowledge by learning only 1 or 2 masail every day. Okay? He said, the way we gathered all of this knowledge was by learning just 1 or 2 hadith every day, or 1 or 2 masail in fiqh every day, and that's it. So فَالْأَصْلُ الَّذِي هُوَ مُفْرَدُ الْجُزْءِ الْأَوَّلِ, the asl, which is considered to be the mufrad here is singular, of al-juz' al-awwal, of the first juz, for the first section, which is usul, it's what? مَا يُبْنَى عَلَيْهِ غَيْرُهُ, that which everything else is built upon. Everything else is built upon the asl. So everything else is a branch of the base. Then he gives an example. For aslul jidar, the asl or the origin, okay, or the base of a wall, asasuhu is what? For aslul jidar, when you say the word aslul jidar, the base of a wall, what is it speaking about? The foundation that it was built upon, isn't it? Then he says, wa aslu shajarati, when you use the word and you say aslu shajara, the asl of a tree, what is it speaking about? Tarafuha al-thabitu fil ard, the roots that sink into the ground. Meaning without this, the branch would not exist, right? Without these bases, nothing else would exist. Okay, so that's very important to understand in that. So that's what the word asl means. So asl, that's what it means. And asl can also have different meanings depending on the context. So sometimes the word asl could mean ad-dalil. So somebody could say, for example, أصل هذه المسألة الإجماع. The asl of this issue or this mas'ala is al-ijma'. Or the قول الله تعالى, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and then he mentions the ayah in Quran, or the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam as an example. And it has so many different meanings also, but in this context here, is the authors only mentioning the linguistical meaning. And it's very important for a person to understand the linguistical meaning before they understand any of the legal meanings. Because if you understand the linguistical meaning, that's the base. Remember this also, the base is the linguistical meaning of any word. Anything that comes after that or is constructed from that word is a base meaning. So for example, the word, we mentioned this last week I believe also, the word as-salah. The word as-salah, the way we understand it to mean the prayer, is that a base word or is it a branch? It's a branch. So what's the base word or what's the base meaning of the word? Sorry? Sila or dua? Dua, yes, dua. So dua, that's the linguistical meaning. So you have, for example, the linguistical meaning, and everything comes after or is branched off from that linguistical meaning. And that's how language evolves. So language evolves, and some words assume new meaning. So then he says, وَالْفَرْعُ, the far' or the branch, الَّذِي هُوَ مُقَابِلُ الْأَصْلِ. So the far' is anything, or the branch is anything, هُوَ مُقَابِلُ الْأَصْلِ, anything that's considered to be the opposite of the base. Anything which is opposite of the base is considered to be a branch. So when we say, for example, shahadati an la ilaha illallah, testifying la ilaha illallah, that's a branch that is born out of Islam. Meaning you can't have la ilaha illallah, you can't have la ilaha illallah without there being Islam, right? That's how it works, and vice versa also. Those he mentions الذي هو مقابل الأصل, that which is مقابل الأصل, meaning that which is also opposite of al-asl or next to asl, meaning in usul al-fiqh, in terms of usul al-fiqh, ما يبنى على غيره, anything which is built on something else. This is the linguistical meaning, by the way. Anything which is built upon something else is a branch. The author he mentions كفروع الشجرة لأصلها, like the relationship that the branches of a tree have with the asl of the tree. The asl of the tree is the roots, right? You can't have the branch without the base. The author he says وفروع, and then he gives an example which is more pertinent to us, وفروع الفقه لأصوله, and also the relationship that fiqh, the science of fiqh, has with usul al-fiqh. Very important. So that's a small definition of these words. Then the author here, he's going to mention what the word al-fiqh means. Before we get into it, al-fiqh has a linguistical meaning and it also has a legal meaning. When I'm going to ask you a question. When the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith that was narrated by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan radiyallahu anhu, when he said, Man yuridillahu bihi khayran yufaqihu fi din. The one whom Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he wants good for, he gives that person, he gives him or her understanding and comprehension of the religion. Was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam speaking about the linguistical meaning of the word, or was he speaking about the legal meaning of the word? The linguistical meaning, right? Or not? Or the legal meaning. When you say the legal meaning, what we're speaking about is the actual science that we know as fiqh. Ahkam al-Shari'iyah, that's it. Prophet ﷺ was speaking about the linguistical meaning, any understanding of, you have the understanding of the religion. So when he said that sallallahu alayhi wasallam, there was no difference whether he was speaking about understanding of the ahkam of the sharia or understanding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself. Does that make sense? Or understanding anything which would enable somebody to understand anything from the religion. So the whole religion, anybody, if Allah wants good for you, He will give you understanding of the religion. Okay? Not just the science, but the word that he used sallallahu alaihi wasallam was al-fiqh. So it's very important for us to understand how language evolves also, because that word in which the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used in fiqh isn't the word that we understand it to be today when we're talking about the science. Imam Al-Ghazali, he mentioned a hadith in his book Ihya Ulumuddin. Those of you who are going to, anybody who wants to study that, it's going to be taught here, I think. It's going to be, Imam Ashraf is going to be teaching that book. He mentions a hadith in which he says, where the Prophet ﷺ spoke about the importance of fiqh. And then Imam Al-Ghazali, he said, إِنَّ هَذَا الْفِقْهِ, this fiqh that the Prophet was speaking about, it's not the fiqh كَمَا ظَنَنْتَهُ, it's not the fiqh that you think it is. Meaning the meaning that we understand it to be today. Because by that time the word has already changed in its meaning. But what was meant was understanding of the religion in its entirety and having a relationship with your Lord, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because what is the ultimate outcome of understanding anything in the deen? Is it not so that you can have a relationship with your Lord, for you to be in a good state with Allah, so your heart could be purified, so that you can be someone who's close to Allah, so that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants you to do something, you do it, and when He wants you to abstain from something, you abstain from it. This is the person who's a faqih, in the meaning that we should understand it to mean. Okay? Then the author mentions and he says, وَالْفِقْهُ أَنَ الْفِقْهُ الَّذِي هُوَ الْجُزْءُ الثَّانِي, that which is from the second of the composition of the composite words, when we say usul al-fiqh, لَهُ مَعْنَى لُغَوِي, he says it has a meaning in the language, the linguistic meaning. وَهُوَ, and it is al-fahmu, understanding, comprehension. For you to have understanding, if I say to you that you've understood how maths is, you understood mathematics very well, you can say the word tafaqqaha. You could use that word linguistically. But legally you can't, because the legal meaning of the word means only if it's in the ahkam of the sharia. But the actual linguistical meaning, the author says, وَهُوَ الْفَهْمُ, is to have understanding. If Allah gives you that understanding, especially of the religion, then you know that you are in a good place, and know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He wants good for you. Then the author, he mentions and he says, وَمَعْنَى شَرْعِيٌّ, and it also has a legal meaning. وَهُوَ, and it is, and this is very important, so I want you especially to pay attention to this point that I'm going to mention here, inshallah. وَهُوَ مَعْرِفَةُ الْأَحْكَامِ الشَّرْعِيَّةِ الَّتِي طَرِيقُهَا الْإِجْتِهَادِ. It means having an understanding or knowledge of the ahkam and the rulings of the sharia, that which طريقها, that which was derived, okay, from al-ijtihad. The word that we should understand fiqh mean today in the science, in the Islamic science of fiqh, the one that we understand it to mean today, is to have knowledge of the rulings of the sharia, that which was derived through a process of ijtihad. So anything that isn't incorporated in this definition isn't considered to be fiqh. And this is very, very important, because what we're doing is, this is known as a definition, and this is one of the most important topics when it comes to usul al-fiqh and also in logic. Ma'rifah, what does that mean? Is to have knowledge of. And it doesn't mean definitive knowledge, it means speculative knowledge. Because the sharia, in many ways, the process in which we derive the ruling is through speculative means, meaning the mujtahid is attempting to understand what this ayah of Quran is telling him. Or the mujtahid is coming to an understanding of what this hadith is saying. That process of coming to that understanding and reaching a conclusion is known as al-ijtihad. Is known as what? Al-ijtihad. Anything that doesn't require al-ijtihad at all isn't fiqh. Does that make sense? I'll give you an example. And I'll repeat it, inshallah, I'll repeat it. I know that praying 5 times a day is wajib. Is that fiqh or is that not fiqh? That's not fiqh. Because this is known as something which is definitive. This is masail qat'iyah. It's a definitive issue. This is, by the way, according to the usuliyin, this is considered to be definitive matters in the religion, meaning you cannot even be considered a Muslim if you have a doubt about the fact that praying 5 times a day is an obligation. So that doesn't go into the bab of al-fiqh at all. Similarly, alcohol is haram. This is definitive. Zina is haram. This is definitive. These are qat'iyat. Okay? As opposed to, is the intention an obligation in wudu? That's speculative. What's the difference between the two? The one which is speculative is considered to be fiqh, because the person who made that judgment or made that call, the faqih who made that call, he did that through his ijtihad. Does that make sense? So that is incorporated into the science of fiqh. And the author is going to mention this now. Look what he says. Ma'rifatul ahkam, understanding or knowledge of al-ahkam. And he mentions al-ahkam al-shar'iyah. Al-ahkam, the rulings pertaining to the sharia. So anything which is not considered ahkam of al-shar'iyah is not considered to be fiqh. So from this, what is not included in this section here? Al-ahkam al-aqliyah. Anything which is ahkam or rulings that were derived from not rational thought isn't considered, even though rational thought is considered to be a way in which people utilize in order to understand, is not considered to be fiqh. التي, the author says, طريقها الاجتهاد, that which was gained, okay, through a process of ijtihad. So anything that's not gained through a process of ijtihad isn't fiqh. That's why when people, it is very surprising when people are so adamant that someone else is wrong in a matter of fiqh. Because the whole of fiqh is ijtihadi aslan. All of fiqh is ijtihadi, meaning that a person assumes that the mujtahid assumes that he's correct in his understanding, with the possibility that somebody else might have a better understanding. That's what fiqh is. That's why Imam Al-Ghazali, he says, al-ijtihadu la yanqudu bil-ijtihad. Ijtihad doesn't cancel out another ijtihad. Yes?
The basis of adila or dalil makes the difference between...
Yeah, that we will come to that inshallah. Make sure you ask me that question as soon as we finish inshallah. And then we will mention that. The author then he says, and he gives examples now. He says, kal-ilmi, like for example, the knowledge that one has, بِأَنَّ النِّيَّةَ فِي الْوُضُوءِ وَاجِبَةٌ. The knowledge that was gained by saying the intention is an obligation in wudu. The intention is an obligation in wudu, that is ijtihadi, therefore it is fiqh. Does that make sense? That is ijtihadi, therefore it is fiqh. Why? Because it's something which is not agreed upon and it's not definitive. The hadith or the dalil that was used, in order to come to that understanding was through speculative means, and he will mention it inshallah. Then he says, وَأَنَّ الْوِتْرَ مَنْدُوبٌ. The conclusion that the witr prayer is a sunnah prayer is also through ijtihad. وَأَنَّ النِّيَّةَ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ شَرْطٌ فِي صَوْمِ رَمَضَانِ. And to also make the conclusion that the intention the night before, meaning before a day in Ramadan, is a condition for fasting in any of the days of Ramadan. The fact that the intention is an obligation, that's also ijtihadi. Because we know the jumhur of the fuqaha, what do they say? For a person you have to have an intention the night before. Because the hadith, isn't it? مَنْ لَمْ يُجْمَعُ النِّيَّةَ أو يُبَيِّتِ النِّيَّةَ مِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَلَا صِيَامَ لَهُ في Ramadan, according to many of the fuqaha, most of the fuqaha. But that's the point he's making. He's saying all of these issues here are ikhtilafi issues, because the conclusion in which we came to these issues are ijtihadi, which means that there's also going to be there's also going to be another opinion that doesn't go in according with. And he makes an example. وَأَنَّ الزَّكَاةَ, another one. وَأَنَّ الزَّكَاةَ وَاجِبَةٌ فِي مَالِ الصَّبِيِّ. That the zakah is an obligation on the child. How many knew that was the prominent or the majority opinion of the fuqaha? A child, a 1-year-old, let's say a 1-year-old baby, inherited a huge amount of money. Okay? And the money that he or she has is zakatable. Do they have to pay zakah? Is zakah wajib on their wealth? Absolutely. And the parent guardian has to pay the zakah on behalf of the child from their own money, from the money of the child. And that's the majority opinion. Why is that the case? How does that work? Because isn't the child, it hasn't reached the age where it's accountable, where the child isn't accountable. So why does it have to do an act of worship? Because according to these fuqaha, which is the majority of the fuqaha, zakah isn't something which is purely worship. There's also a right for the poor. in society has a right on that money. That's why the fuqaha, they mention, Imam Shafi'i, he mentions, as soon as the year comes to an end, the portion which is an obligation, the portion that is an obligation for them, for that wealth to be paid, that portion is taken out of their possession, meaning it's not considered to be their wealth anymore. Automatically, by default, as soon as the year comes to an end, that portion of money is not considered to be their wealth anymore. As automatically the poor have a claim or a stake of that wealth. Or then he says, غير واجبة في الحلي المباح. And also, that's ijtihadi by the way, and he also says, also the fact that az-zakah is not an obligation on women's jewelry. On the jewelry that women wear, that they like to wear, the gold and everything else, it's not an obligation. بقصد الزينة, of course. Al-huli. So it's jewelry. Al-mubah. So that's considered to be also ijtihadi because the Imam Abu Hanifa doesn't agree. وأن القتل بمثقل يوجب القصاص. And he mentions also killing somebody with a heavy weapon or a weapon which would give the person no chance to survive, that obligates the law of retaliation. That is also ijtihadi, meaning al-qisas. Then he says, وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ مِن مَسَائِلِ الْخِلَافِ. And also any other masail or issues that have a difference of opinion. These are all ijtihadi issues, and these are all considered to be fiqh. Then he says, بِخِلَافِ, in opposition, ما ليس طريقة الاجتهاد أو طريقه الاجتهاد, that which isn't born, or things which we come, or conclusions that we arrive at that doesn't come from ijtihad. Then he says كالعلم, like the knowledge that we have, بأن الصلوات الخمس واجبة, like the knowledge that we have that the 5 daily prayers are an obligation, meaning that's not ijtihad, therefore it's not fiqh. Then he says وأن الزنا محرم, and that adultery and fornication is haram. This is not fiqhi and it's not ijtihadi aslan. Then he says وَنَحْوِ ذَلِكَ, and also similar masail من المسائل القطعية, that which is considered to be definitives. The Sharia has definitives and it has speculatives. The majority of the Sharia is speculative. The minority of opinions that we study, that we know through the religion, are definitives. And there's a wisdom in that, because otherwise there would be no such thing as Islamic scholarship, and there would be no virtue in Islamic scholarship had everything already been concluded, and had it been as easy as somebody saying, oh, but that's what it says here, or you open Bukhari and then you think you know what it means, but it really doesn't. If it was that easy, then everybody would be a scholar. Everybody has Bukhari at home, right? So that means everyone's truly a scholar, isn't it, nowadays? That's not how it works. So there's principles and there's ways of understanding. Also then he says, فَلَا يُسَمَّى فِقْهًا, this we do not call it fiqh. فَالْمَعْرِفَةُ هُنَا, he says, so understanding and knowledge here, al-ilmu, or that which we use to as the word, or the word that's used here, which is knowledge, بِمَعْنَى الظَّنِّ, what it really means is speculation. Now I want you maybe to write this down, inshallah, to make it easy for everybody to understand. When it comes to usul al-fiqh, okay, for you to understand the difference between all of these words, you have something which is known as al-yaqeen or al-qat'i, which is definitive. Then you have something which is known as dhanni or speculative. Then you have something which is known as ashak, which is doubt. Then you have something which is known as al-wahm, which is confusion. Okay, these four. Anything which is 100% is qat'i. 100% equals what? Definitive. Anything between 51 and 99 is speculative. So write that down. Anywhere in between what? 51 and 99 is speculative, dhanni. 50 equals doubt, shak. 50 equals doubt. Anything between 1 and 49 is al-wahm. Al-wahm, the best way for me to describe that word is when you assume something to be the case when it actually really isn't. Okay? Zero is no knowledge whatsoever. Does that make sense? And this is how the Sharia works. The vast majority, okay, of Masail al-fiqh, according to the person who wrote the book or according to the scholar himself, is dealing with the 51 to the 99. The 51 to the 99. Fiqh doesn't deal with the 100. Does that make sense? At all. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, La ilaha illallah. Is that, you want me to repeat it? Sorry. Okay, so yaqiniyat, or that which is qat'i, is 100. Meaning you have 100% certainty, there's no doubt whatsoever. I'll give you an example. The Quran itself, let me explain another way. The Quran that we have, the book of Allah, is it qat'i? Is the qat'i, right? Definitive. We know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. For me to derive a ruling from it, is that definitive or speculative? The conclusion that I come to. It could be both, right? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says La ilaha illallah in the Quran, that's definitive, right? But what about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, إِذَا قُمْتُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ. That becomes dhanni. So that's why they say the Quran is qat'i al-thubut. Qat'i al-thubut means it's definitive in the way it's established. It's established, Quran is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dhanni ad-dalala. But that which you can gain from it and the process in which you can come to a conclusion, many a times falls into what? What? Dhanni, which is speculative. That's why there can be a difference of opinion, and that's why it's allowed in Islamically for there to be a difference of opinion, okay? In the Sharia. In an ayah of Quran, you might find many scholars have a completely different understanding of what the verse says. None of them dispute the authenticity of the verse, yes or no? Does anybody say, no, this verse is not even authentic? Have you ever heard anybody say that? Nobody says that, sah? They wouldn't be Muslim if they said that. They all agree on the verse and its authenticity. However, the way they understood the verse, that's what's known as what? Dhanni ad-dalala. Then you have qat'i ad-dalala, like I mentioned to you, which is what? Which is La ilaha illallah, for example. Aqimu as-salah, atu az-zakah. You know, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, kutiba alaykum as-siyam, fasting. Walillahi ala al-nasi, hijju al-bayt, man istata'a ilayhi sabila. So I hope you understood the difference between the two, inshallah. We'll stop there, inshallah.